My parents told me to call a cab while I was in labor. 1 week later, Mom came to meet my baby. I looked at her and said, "What baby?" I was driving 73 miles an hour down Interstate 35 inches active labor when I finally understood that my parents were never going to change. It was not some profound emotional breakthrough. It was not the result of therapy, journaling, or a long healing conversation over coffee. It happened because I was gripping the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt, trying to survive a contraction so violent that the edges of my vision went white, completely alone, driving myself to the emergency room while, somewhere behind me in Round Rock, my mother was refilling a man named Dominic's wine glass and laughing at a joke that probably was not even funny. That was the moment. Not a metaphorical moment, a real one. A precise one. Friday night in September. 9:17 p.m. The Austin skyline, blinking ahead in the distance. A semi-truck drifting toward my lane. A contraction crushing the air out of my lungs, so completely that I had to count the white dashes on the asphalt just to stay conscious. 4, 5, 6. Breathe, Penelope. Drive. Your baby needs you to drive. I have replayed that stretch of highway more times than I can count. I have replayed the dining room too. The heavy oak table. The expensive china my mother only brought out when she wanted to impress people with money. The roast beef in the center, like some kind of sacrifice on an altar of pure vanity. I have replayed my father's voice, calm and condescending, as he crossed his arms and delivered the sentence that ended our relationship with the casualness of a man refusing a second helping of dessert. "Call a cab. We're busy." 7 words. That was all it took to burn down 27 years. You need to understand the family I came from before any of this makes complete sense. I was a glass child. If you have never heard that term, it describes a very specific kind of invisible child, the one who seems so capable, so quiet, so self-sufficient, that the adults around them eventually stop seeing them at all. Glass children do not require maintenance. They do not cry too loudly, demand attention, or throw tantrums in grocery stores. They absorb everything. They endure everything, because they figured out very early that nobody was coming to check on them anyway. My younger sister, Valerie, was never a glass child. Valerie was 25, perfectly maintained, polished like a show car, and she had been the center of the universe in our household for as long as I could remember. She was the one my parents drove to dance recitals at 6 in the morning. She was the one my mother cried over at award ceremonies, dabbing her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She was the one my father quietly rearranged his entire schedule around because Valerie's needs were visible, urgent, and important. Mine were not. When I was 10 years old, I fell off my bicycle and broke my left arm so badly that the bone pressed against my skin like a tent pole. I walked into the house and told my mother. My voice was shaking, but controlled, because I had already learned that in our family, composure was the price of being taken seriously. She looked at my arm. Then she looked at the clock. "Valerie's recital is in 40 minutes, she said. "It's her first solo. Can you ice it until we get back?" I iced it for 4 hours. I am telling you this because it matters. It matters for context. It matters because 17 years later, when I sat in that dining room and watched my body go into labor while my mother watched me with narrowed, annoyed eyes, the pattern was so familiar that it almost did not hurt. Almost. I had been married to Harrison Marsh for 3 years when everything fell apart. Harrison was 29, a senior software engineer at a mid-sized tech firm in Austin, and the kind of man who noticed you had had a hard day before you said a single word about it. We met at a college mixer, dated for 4 years, and got married in a small ceremony that my parents attended grudgingly because Valerie had a spa appointment that same weekend, and the scheduling conflict caused what my mother called unnecessary stress. Harrison and I had built a quiet life, a deliberate one. I ran a freelance marketing business from our apartment, mostly working with small businesses and nonprofit organizations, creating campaigns on my own schedule. We were not wealthy by any standard my parents would recognize, but we were comfortable. We were debt-free. We did not spend money we did not have to impress people we did not care about. That placed us in a fundamentally different universe from Beatrice and Gregory. My parents lived in a nice suburban house in Round Rock, about 25 minutes north of Austin. From the outside, they looked like a successful upper-middle-class family. A new car in the driveway, fresh landscaping, a dining room full of expensive china, But I had known since I was a teenager that the china was financed, the landscaping was charged to a Visa card, and my father had been quietly drowning in debt for at least a decade while working furiously to keep the illusion afloat. That context matters too, because when Valerie started bringing home a man named Dominic, my parents did not see a boyfriend. They saw a lifeline. Dominic Ferrara was 32 years old. He drove a leased Porsche, wore blazers that were always just a little too tight across the shoulders, and carried the smooth, rehearsed confidence of a man who had spent years monetizing the gap between how things looked and how things actually were. He was, allegedly, the founder of a tech startup called Apex Dynamics, a platform he described in breathless, jargon-heavy terms that changed slightly every time he explained it. Scalable infrastructure, proprietary machine learning architecture, projected 9-figure valuation by year 3. My father nodded along to these phrases, the way people nod along to sermons in a language they do not speak. His face was reverent. His mind was empty. I had met Dominic exactly once before, that Friday dinner, during a brief introduction at my parents' house 2 months earlier. My first impression was polished surface, nothing underneath, like a showroom model. My parents' first impression was the answer to every financial prayer they had quietly been sending up for 10 years. My mother called me 4 times that week to confirm I was coming to dinner. 4 times, each call more insistent than the last, layered with the specific, guilt-edged pressure she had perfected over 3 decades of motherhood. It's important, Penelope. Dominic is serious about Valerie. This could change everything for our family. I was 39 weeks pregnant. I was exhausted. Every instinct I had told me to stay home. I went anyway. Because even at 27, I was still a glass child trying to earn her seat at the table. I arrived at my parents' house at 6:45 p.m. The table was set with the good china. That was the first red flag I noticed, and immediately rationalized. They were just excited. It was a big night for Valerie. Let them have it. Dominic was already seated at the head of the table, in my father's usual chair, which nobody commented on. He was mid-monologue when I walked in, holding court about his Series A strategy, while my father leaned forward with the hungry, bright-eyed look of a man calculating his percentage on an imaginary napkin. Valerie was pressed against Dominic's side, glowing with the particular smugness of someone who believed she had secured something valuable. I took my seat near the end of the table. I was already feeling an ache deep in my lower back, wrapping around toward the front, the kind of pressure that had been coming and going for a week. Braxton Hicks, I told myself, shifting in my chair. Totally normal. I still had time. Relax. The roast beef smelled incredible. Then, suddenly, it smelled wrong. I pushed the thought aside and smiled politely at my mother when she passed the potatoes. The first real contraction hit at 7:22 p.m. It was not the dull practice ache I had been managing. It was different. A hard band of pressure started in my spine and traveled forward like a fist closing around my entire midsection. I gripped the edge of the table and breathed through it. 4 counts in, hold for 2. 6 counts out. Dominic was explaining his platform's scalability. Essentially infinite, he said, taking a slow sip of the wine my mother had poured for him with the delicacy of someone handling holy water. My mother glanced at me. Her eyes narrowed. Penelope, you're fidgeting. Can you please? Sorry, I said automatically. 27 years of conditioning compressed into one reflexive word. Sorry for existing in your eye line. Sorry my body is doing something inconvenient. Sorry. The second contraction came 9 minutes later. Stronger, more specific, the kind that demanded a response from my body whether I authorized one or not. I pressed my lips together hard enough to go numb and reached for my phone under the table. I texted Harrison. I think it's starting. Contractions. Trying to leave soon. You might not get this for a while. Server stuff, but just in case. I knew it might be hours before he saw it. His team was in the middle of a full data center migration, the kind of IT emergency where every engineer surrenders their phone and their freedom until the servers stop screaming. I looked around the table. My father, entranced by Dominic, my mother, refilling wine, Valerie, tracing lazy circles on Dominic's forearm with one finger. I was surrounded by people who shared my blood, and I had never been more alone. The third contraction came at 7:41 p.m., 8 minutes after the last one. The pressure was sharpening into something I could not smile through anymore. Heat rose into my face. A bead of sweat slid down my spine beneath my maternity dress. This is real, something deep and primal said clearly. This is not Braxton Hicks. Get out of this house. I was trying to calculate how to excuse myself gracefully, how to minimize the disruption, how to slip away without anyone noticing, because 27 years of conditioning had trained me to disappear rather than inconvenience anyone. Then my body made the decision for me. The pop was audible only to me. The warmth was immediate. My water broke at 7:44 p.m. in my mother's dining room chair. In the middle of my sister's boyfriend's pitch about machine learning architecture, I pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped sharply across the hardwood floor. Every head turned. What on earth? My mother started. I stood up, gripping the chair back. My knuckles went white. Another contraction hit almost immediately, the kind that wanted to fold me in half, and I forced myself upright through sheer will. My water broke, I said. My voice shook, but it carried. I'm in labor. The contractions are close together. I need to go to Dell Medical right now. I need one of you to drive me. For one beat, there was silence. I watched my father's face. I watched the calculation happen in real time, the slight tightening around his eyes, the glance at Dominic, the assessment of social cost. I watched him decide. He leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Are you serious right now? My mother said. Her voice dropped into the razor-edged whisper she used when she wanted to punish you without making a scene. Penelope, Dominic was just getting to the most important part. This dinner is... Mom, my voice cracked just slightly. I am in labor. My son is coming tonight, please. Valerie set down her fork with a quiet clatter. God, Penny. Her tone was tired, as if I had committed a social mistake. You're always doing this. Everything has to be about you. Can you not even let me have one dinner? My father unfolded slightly from his crossed-arm posture, leaned forward, and looked at me with the measured calm of a man who had made a decision he believed was reasonable. Penelope, he said, this dinner is pivotal for this family's future. Dominic is talking about real money here. We cannot just abandon everything because you have bad timing. He picked up his wine glass. Call a cab. We're busy. I have thought many times since that night about what I might have said, about the things I wish I had found the words for, about the perfect, annihilating response. I did not say any of them. I picked up my purse. I walked out the front door. I did not look back. The September heat hit me like a wall. I stood on the porch for 3 seconds, listening for footsteps behind me. Nothing. Through the window, I could see the warm chandelier light and the silhouettes settling back into their chairs. I heard the faint sound of my father's laugh. Then a contraction dropped me to my knees on the concrete. I made a sound I do not have a word for, somewhere between a gasp, a sob, and something animal and unscripted. My palm hit the porch. I breathed through it. 4 and 2 and 6. Again and again, until I could stand. Then I stood. I walked to my car. Getting into the driver's seat took longer than it should have. Every movement sent shockwaves through my pelvis. I sat behind the wheel for maybe 4 seconds, shaking, before I turned the ignition. Drive. Your baby needs you to drive. I backed out of the driveway and pulled onto the street without looking at the house. I never looked at that house again. Interstate 35 southbound at 8 o'clock on a Friday night in September is a specific kind of hell even under normal circumstances. Moderate traffic. Construction cones narrowing the lanes near the Palmer exit. The particular aggressive energy of Austin drivers, who treat every lane change like a personal challenge. I drove through it in active labor. By the time I merged onto the highway, the contractions were coming every 6 minutes. Every time one hit, I had to fight the overwhelming biological urge to close my eyes. Instead, I locked my gaze on the white dashes and counted them. 1, 2, 3. Do not close your eyes. At one point, a semi drifted into my lane near the Runberg exit. I laid on the horn. The truck corrected. My heart did not come back down for 2 miles. I hit the voice command on my steering wheel. Call Jasmine. Jasmine Okonkwo had been my best friend since our junior year of college, when she sat down next to me in an 8 a.m. marketing lecture and immediately whispered the most accurate summary of the professor I had ever heard. She was exactly the kind of woman you want in your corner when everything goes wrong. Sharp, warm, decisive, and constitutionally incapable of telling you everything is fine when it is not. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey, what's up?" "Jazz." Another contraction hit, and I bit through the end of her name. "I'm in labor. I'm on 35. I'm driving myself." There was a clatter. Something dropped. "You're what? Where's Harrison? Where are your parents? You were literally just at." "Harrison's phone is off. Server thing." I exhaled hard. "My parents told me to call a cab." There was a pause so short it almost did not count as a pause. Then Jasmine spoke in a voice I had never quite heard from her before. Quiet. Combustible. The specific temperature of someone who had just decided to do something. "They did what?" "Jazz, I need you to." "I'm already putting on shoes," she said. "Dell Medical, emergency entrance. I will be there in 15 minutes. Keep your eyes on the road, do not look at your phone. I'm calling Harrison's office mainline the second I hang up. I'll get security to physically drag him out of that server room if I have to." She took a breath. "You are going to make it, Penny. You are going to make it. I need you to drive, okay? Drive." The line went dead. I pressed my foot down. The emergency entrance at Dell Medical Center appeared out of the dark at 8:31 p.m. Like a lighthouse. I pulled into the drop-off zone at an angle I can only describe as optimistic and threw the car into park. The engine was still running when I got the door open. I did not care. I stood, grabbed the roof for support, and made it approximately 4 feet before a security guard, a young guy, maybe 22 years old, saw me. His expression went from routine alertness to focused urgency in about half a second. "I need a wheelchair," he shouted. "Somebody get me a wheelchair." 2 nurses came through the sliding doors at a controlled sprint. One of them, a woman with close-cropped hair and the calm, collected authority of someone who had done this exact thing 100 times, grabbed my arm and got me into the chair before I had fully processed that the chair had appeared. "How far apart?" she asked. "Already moving." 6 minutes, I said. "Maybe less." My voice sounded very far away. "Water broke about an hour ago. You drove yourself here?" "Yes." She did not say anything to that, but something in the set of her jaw shifted. They moved fast. Triage. Monitors. The cold shock of a hospital gown replacing my ruined dress. A nurse named Delia, calm and precise, got an IV line into my arm while reading my vitals, with the efficiency of someone fluent in a language I was only now beginning to understand. Then, the triage bay doors opened. Harrison came in still wearing his work badge, his dress shirt soaked through, his eyes wild and red and terrified. "Penny!" He reached the bed in 4 steps and grabbed my hand with both of his. I felt something structural release in my chest, some load-bearing tension I had been holding since the moment I walked out of that dining room. "I'm here," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I'm so sorry. I'm right here." "You're here," I said. That was enough. Our son was born at 12:47 a.m. He arrived with fury, screaming before he was fully out, making his feelings about the entire situation abundantly clear. In that moment, it felt like the most honest thing any member of my family had done in years. The doctor, Dr. Renata Solis, who had spent 12 years in obstetrics and had been calmly steering the room since the second she walked in, placed him on my chest. He stopped crying immediately. His tiny fist curled against my collarbone. His eyes, dark, unfocused, brand new, found my face and seemed to recognize something in it. I looked down at 6 pounds and 4 ounces of pure, uncomplicated need, and my entire understanding of what family was supposed to feel like rewired itself in about 10 seconds. Harrison pressed his forehead against mine. His tears fell onto my cheeks. I let them. Jasmine was outside the door, sending Harrison updates every 20 minutes and making terrible jokes in her texts to keep him grounded. Calvin and Loretta, Harrison's parents, had started driving down from the Dallas suburbs the moment he managed to call them from the delivery suite. Somewhere on I-35, real family was moving toward us. It was just past 2 in the morning when my phone lit up on the bedside table. Missed calls, 4 from my mother, 1 from my father, 0 texts. They had not asked whether I was alive. I played the voicemails on speaker with Harrison sitting on the edge of the bed and our son sleeping in the bassinet between us. My mother's voice filled the quiet room. Crisp. Annoyed. Not a tremor of concern in it. Penelope. It's your mother. It's 11:30. Your father and I are incredibly disappointed in your dramatic exit tonight. Valerie was in tears. You completely ruined the mood. And Dominic had to leave early because things got so awkward. You were obviously just experiencing Braxton Hicks and overreacting for attention. Call me tomorrow and apologize to your sister. Her future with Dominic is pivotal for this family, and you are not going to ruin it. Good night. She did not ask if I made it to the hospital. She assumed I was faking. My father's voicemail followed. Penny, it's Dad. Listen, your mother is very upset. That dinner was important. We are talking about real investment opportunities with Dominic's firm. Actual money, Penelope. The kind that could change things for us. You know how tight things have been. I expect you to fix this. Let us know when you're done pouting. The room was completely silent when it ended. My son made a small sound in his sleep. A soft, unconscious exhale. The tiniest punctuation mark. Harrison stood up slowly. He picked up my phone. He did not ask. He navigated to my contacts with his thumbs and blocked 3 numbers in silence. One after another. The soft taps of the screen were the only sounds in the room. Tap. Mom, block contact. Tap. Dad, block contact. Tap. Valerie, block contact. He set the phone face down on the table. Then he picked up his own phone and did the same. I watched him do it and felt, one by one, the links of a very old chain snapping loose. The weeks that followed were 2 things at the same time. The hardest of my life and the most clarifying. Recovering from childbirth while processing a complete family rupture is not a combination I would recommend. Your body is rebuilding itself from the inside out. Your hormones are conducting their own private demolition. And somewhere in the background of your brain, behind the feeding schedules and the impossibly tiny socks, your childhood is quietly filing for bankruptcy. I grieved my parents while nursing my son at 3 a.m. I know how strange that sounds. They were alive. They were 25 minutes away in Round Rock, probably eating cereal or watching cable television. But grief does not require death. It only requires loss. And I was mourning the parents I had never actually had. The ones I had spent 27 years hoping they would eventually become. They had finally answered that question definitively at 73 miles an hour on a Friday night. Harrison's parents arrived 2 days after the birth. Calvin and Loretta drove down from Dallas with the back of their car loaded with groceries, a portable bassinet stand, and a casserole dish that smelled like garlic and brown butter. Loretta walked in, took one look at me, at my unwashed hair, the dark circles under my eyes, and the specific 1,000-yard stare of a woman running on 40-minute sleep intervals, and pulled me into a careful, warm hug. Go take a shower, she said firmly. I have the baby. Calvin is making dinner. You are going to eat a hot meal and wash your hair, and that is not a suggestion. Calvin, who communicated mostly through acts of quiet competence, had already tied an apron around his waist and was investigating the spice cabinet with focused intention. I stood in the shower for 22 minutes and cried in a way I had not been able to before. Not from grief, not from fear. From the specific, overwhelming relief of being taken care of. From the shock of someone seeing that I needed something and simply providing it, without calculation, without conditions, without keeping a ledger. This, I understood, was what family was supposed to feel like. I was 27 years old the first time I truly felt it. The digital harassment started on a Tuesday, because blocked phone numbers only seal one door, and my parents had others. I was nursing my son on the couch when a notification appeared on my phone, a comment on a public photo I had posted months earlier from an account with 0 followers, no profile picture, and a username that looked like a keyboard had sneezed. It's really sad when pregnancy hormones turn someone into a selfish attention seeker. Ruining a family dinner because your sister finally found a successful man says a lot about your character. Your parents deserve an apology. The language. Successful man. The absolute airless lack of self-awareness. It was Valerie, or my mother, probably both of them, sitting at a kitchen table in Round Rock, creating a burner email account with the grim determination of people who had mistaken harassment for leverage. A second account appeared by evening, a third by the next morning. Each comment rewrote the same night from a different angle. I was dramatic. I was attention-seeking. I had traumatized my sister. I had frightened Dominic. Apparently, I had single-handedly dismantled an important business relationship by having the audacity to go into labor at an inconvenient time. I handed my phone to Harrison without a word. He read the comments. Then he sat down at his laptop. Harrison had been building and securing software systems for 7 years, and he approached my social media accounts with the methodical, slightly terrifying focus of a man who professionally locks doors for a living. Maximum privacy settings across every platform. IP blocks on the fake accounts. Comments scrubbed. Then he did the same to his own profiles, and for good measure, flagged the accounts to each platform's harassment reporting system. "They're dark," he said 40 minutes later, handing my phone back. "They can't see your name in a search bar. They can't leave comments. They can't send messages. As far as your social media is concerned, you don't exist to them anymore." I looked at my son sleeping in his bassinet. Good, I thought. That is exactly right. They showed up at our apartment on a Saturday morning. I heard the doorbell 3 times. Rapid, aggressive. The knock-knock of someone who believes their arrival is an event. Harrison checked the peephole camera on his phone, and I watched the color drain from his face. "Your parents," he said. "Valerie." A cluster of blue. "It's a boy." Balloons bobbed behind them. My mother held a gift bag that looked like it had been assembled in approximately 4 minutes at a CVS. The sheer architectural audacity of it almost impressed me. They had left me to drive Interstate 35 inches active labor. They had left voicemails blaming me for ruining their dinner. They had spent a week creating fake accounts to harass me online. And now they were standing on my welcome mat with helium balloons and the breezy expectation of normal people paying a normal visit. Harrison moved toward the door. I touched his arm. "I'm doing this," I said. He looked at me and nodded once. I unlocked the deadbolt and pulled the door open. My mother's face rearranged itself instantly into something warm and rehearsed. "Penelope, sweetheart, you're not coming in." The warmth flickered, recalibrated. "Penny?" My father started, using the condescending patience of a man who believed he was being enormously reasonable. "We drove all the way down here. We brought gifts. You've made your point. Let's be adults about this." "You told me to call a cab," I said. My voice was completely level. Not raised, not emotional. The voice of someone who had spent 7 days compressing grief into something hard and precise. "You were in the middle of your pitch meeting," Valerie said. Dominic was explaining. "I'm not talking to you," I said. Something in my tone made her stop. I looked at my mother. "You left a voicemail accusing me of faking labor for attention. You didn't ask if I made it to the hospital. You didn't ask if your grandson was alive." I let that sit for 1 full second. "You are asking me to let you in to see a baby you were willing to let be born on a highway median." Beatrice's face flushed dark red. The rehearsed warmth disappeared completely, replaced by the version of my mother I had grown up with, the one who believed fury was a reasonable response to being held accountable. "How dare you? You want to see your grandchild?" The words came out of me with a strange, cold clarity. "You keep calling him that. Your grandchild. But 1 week ago, when I was standing in your dining room in active labor, terrified, begging for help, you didn't see a grandchild. You saw an interruption." My voice shook now, but not from weakness. It shook from the very specific vibration of something that had been compressed for a very long time, finally releasing. "So I'll ask you one question. What grandchild? You told me to leave. I left. I'm not going back." The hallway went silent. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Harrison stepped forward. His voice was quiet and absolute. "You have 1 minute to leave this building before I call Austin PD for criminal trespassing and document this interaction for a harassment complaint. I have the voicemails, the fake social media accounts, your IP addresses, and this conversation on camera." He pointed to the small security camera mounted above our door, which, given his job, was excellent and had been running the entire time. "I'm not asking, I'm informing you." My father went pale. He grabbed my mother's arm. Valerie had already turned toward the elevator, her phone out, wanting no part of whatever her parents had walked into. Gregory looked at me one last time. His face cycled through several things: anger, indignation, and then, very briefly, something that might have been shame. Then he turned and walked away. My mother looked at me the way she always had, like I was something that had disappointed her by existing. Then she followed him. I closed the door. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I stood with my back against the door, eyes closed, and let out a breath that had been building for 27 years. Harrison put his hand on my face. I leaned into it. From the bassinet in the living room, my son made a small, unconscious sound, a tiny bubble of noise. Not distress, just presence. I'm here, he said in the language of new things that had not learned words yet. I know, I told him silently. Me too. 7 months passed. Our son learned to track moving objects with his eyes, then to grip our fingers with his whole fist, then to produce strong opinions about everything at significant volume. Harrison was promoted to lead engineer. My freelance revenue crossed $5,000 a month for the first time. We did not hear from my parents. Not one word. The threat of a harassment complaint had apparently landed with exactly the weight Harrison intended. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in mid-April, I was at a downtown cafe finishing a campaign proposal when Jasmine slid into the seat across from me with the specific expression she gets when she is carrying information she has been physically restraining herself from delivering. I have to tell you something, she said. Tell me. I ran into Mrs. Higgins at the grocery store. Mrs. Higgins was a neighbor on my parents' street in Round Rock, a cheerful, observant woman in her late 60s who had lived 3 houses down for as long as I could remember and knew everything that happened within a quarter-mile radius with the calm omniscience of someone who had simply been paying attention for decades. And? I asked. Jasmine leaned forward. Dominic was a fraud. I set down my coffee cup. His startup, Apex Dynamics, the whole machine learning platform. It was vaporware, Penny. Nothing. There was no proprietary technology. He was taking angel investor money, paying himself a salary, leasing the Porsche, and producing exactly nothing. When his investors started demanding audits a few months ago, the whole structure collapsed. He filed for bankruptcy. She paused for emphasis and disappeared. Left Valerie. Left Austin. Left the state, possibly to avoid fraud charges. The cafe noise continued around us. Someone laughed near the counter. A barista called out an order. I said very carefully, "Did my parents invest in it?" Jasmine looked at me with the expression of someone delivering a diagnosis they wished they did not have. They remortgaged the house, she said. According to Mrs. Higgins, Gregory mentioned it to a neighbor in October, called it getting in on the ground floor. They put in everything they could access. When Dominic vanished, it went with him. She took a breath. They're facing foreclosure. Valerie had to move back in because she burned through her savings, living Dominic's lifestyle. Their credit is destroyed. I sat with that for a long time. I had expected to feel triumphant, some hot, satisfying surge of poetic justice, the karmic ledger balancing itself with perfect symmetry in front of my eyes. What I actually felt was a vast, quiet sadness. They had bet everything on an illusion of wealth. They had sacrificed their daughter, their grandson, and a real relationship that might have sustained them. They had traded all of that for a man in a tight blazer who had been lying to them from the first sentence. They had chosen the performance of success over the actual substance of it, and the performance had dissolved the second it made contact with reality. I don't feel what I thought I'd feel, I told Jasmine. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. I know, she said, but you are not responsible for their choices. You never were. She was right. I had been a glass child, invisible, capable, accommodating, endlessly and fruitlessly hopeful that the people who should have seen me would eventually look in my direction. In the end, they looked everywhere except at me, and everything they pinned their hopes to evaporated. Meanwhile, in my quiet apartment, with my son, my husband, and the friends who showed up for me, I had built something real. My son is walking now, tentative, thrilled, listing to one side like a very small sailor in rough seas, absolutely convinced that his ability to cross 3 feet of floor under his own power is the most extraordinary thing that has ever occurred in human history. He might be right. Last weekend, Calvin and Loretta drove down from Dallas. Calvin grilled chicken in the backyard, while Loretta and I sat on the steps, drank iced tea, and watched the baby investigate a garden hose with the focused intensity of a scientist who had just discovered an entirely new field of inquiry. Jasmine came over in the evening, bringing expensive cheese and absolutely zero apologies for how much of it she intended to eat. We sat outside until after dark. the lights strung across the fence, making everything look like a photograph you would keep. At one point, Loretta looked at my son toddling across the grass toward Harrison with the specific, reckless confidence of someone who had not yet learned what falling felt like, and she said quietly, "He has no idea how lucky he is." I looked at him, at Harrison, crouching with his arms wide, ready to catch him. "At the light." "He doesn't need to know yet," I said. "That's kind of the whole point. I grew up a glass child. Transparent, load-bearing, completely unseen. My son will never wonder if his pain is an inconvenience. He will never drive himself to the hospital. He will never sit at the end of a table and count himself lucky just to have a chair." I drove myself down Interstate 35 at 73 miles an hour in active labor because the people who were supposed to be my family were too busy to look up from a con man's pitch. That drive was the last thing I ever did for them. Everything since has been entirely for us.